Welcome back. You are listening to another episode of the Keep the Change podcast, and we've got another episode with Rupert Carline from Koura Kiwisaver, and it may look like we're wearing the same clothes, but we're on a completely different day.
I have a uniform. You don't have a uniform that you wear every day?
Maybe I should. Maybe this could be it.
That's make my life a whole lot quicker and easier.
Very smart. How much time does that save you a day?
Oh, probably 30 seconds.
30 seconds. Okay.
Well, the one thing though, giving up on shirts has probably been the best time saver that you'll ever have.
No ironing.
No ironing.
Nice. Well, this isn't a podcast about hacks for efficiency and time, but sometimes it is. But today we're going to be talking to you about the future of Kiwisaver, which I've got some questions, and I think some people out there will as well, because I think there's a few people that are skeptical that eventually they're going to keep contributing to Kiwisaver and they're either going to get taxed, the government's going to take all their money. I hear that one every now and then, or who knows? And you've probably heard some of these things as well. Yeah. What do you normally hear?
Tax, they're going to change the ages, or the government's going to take it away. I think last year with the GST tax proposal, I mean, that confirmed a whole lot of people's fears around it just was going to be seen as a big tax grab. Or the other one, and actually I do have some sympathy with this, is it's going to be used as a way to stop people getting access to the pension and NZ Super.
Ooh.
So if you've got Kiwisaver, you won't get Super. So yeah, look, lots and lots and lots of different things.
I've kind of got $1 each way on that one. Like, I do sort of think the reason that I've contributed more to is I wonder that as I get closer to 65, which is 30 years away, that it will get dialed back, that superannuation. And therefore I need to ensure that I've got a decent Kiwisaver balance. But I know what will probably happen. It'll probably be means tested, and I won't qualify.
It'll be the Kiwisaver that means you don't qualify.
Yeah, but I've also kind of set myself a goal to hopefully get to 65 and not need my super, to then be able to donate it back somewhere.
That's awesome.
Because I kind of think that, wouldn't it be really cool if we had a way in New Zealand where at a taxpayer level, if you were getting super, that you could say, I don't need this, but I know I'm entitled to it, but I want to give mine to this fund, and it could be the Auckland Infrastructure Fund, or it could be the Rebuild the Hawke's Bay, or it could be the West Coasters, the Up and Coming Fund, or whatever, and basically you push your super back.
I think that'd be amazing.
Yeah. So you want to vote for that, or?
Oh, happy to vote for that one. I would say that's actually doable today, though.
You reckon? Easy.
Well, you get your, well, I think super's paid fortnightly into your bank account, and you just set up a direct debit that comes out the same day.
Nice. Because super's about 17 billion a year, I think. And I sort of thought, well, if 50% of people did it for 1 year, that's a big portion of the rebuild of the Hawke's Bay done.
Well, I'd say that's it all, probably most of it done, right? And I think what's really interesting though, in this, you'd end up with a whole lot of charities that would be popping up and being able to do stuff. And I think what it does is it creates competition among the social services and the social welfare system. So if you had the charitable kind of world that's all of a sudden better funded and better able to contribute, I think as society would be much better off.
All right.
That's a different conversation.
Yeah. You got us off tangent there nice and quickly. But yeah, so that is one of the things. Maybe super will get phased out. And at the moment, you turn 65. Basically, if you've been in New Zealand and you've got residency, you effectively qualify, right, at a very simple high level. And you could still be working. And I think 2020, 30,000-ish people were earning over $100,000 that were getting super. And I've seen clients throughout my accounting career. Yeah, it's pretty high now. Throughout my accounting career, where they are still working, but they're working to their 70s, and so they're getting super as well, and that's part of their taxable income.
Yeah, and I don't think that's right. To be honest, like I know quite a few people of my parents' age and generation and friend group. They're all getting it. Most of them don't need it.
But there's a big with their demographic though. I always hear no, but like I'm entitled to this. I worked my whole life to get this or something. There's this weird vibe like they feel like all that money just randomly got put aside and is now being given back to them. But
massively. I've paid taxes my whole life, so therefore that's what I get, right?
Yeah.
They've forgotten about the education, the roading, the everything else they got as well.
Yeah.
I think in New Zealand we've never been willing to have a conversation on population. and we've never been able to have a conversation around long-term, what does New Zealand look like? The are two facts that are indisputable, or one fact, sorry, we do have an aging population. And what that will lead to is that will lead to the fact that we're going to have a shrinking workforce. The percentage of people under the age of 65 is shrinking and getting smaller and smaller. So unfortunately, an aging population, what that means to New Zealand is we've got massively higher pension costs. So that's why they're expected to go from 4.5% to 6.5% of GDP. We're going to have significantly higher healthcare costs because the cost of delivering healthcare to an older population is significantly higher. And we're going to have less workers to pay for it.
Sounds like a perfect shitstorm.
Yeah. But look, I'm not even saying this to scare me. These are all facts. These are all indisputable facts. But we're not willing to have a conversation about how we deal with all of this stuff, right? So my view would be we have to, NZ Super, an easy way, we have to make that means tested, but we can't just pull the rug out from people. So therefore, that's where Kiwisaver comes in. Because if we say means testing Kiwisaver, less people are going to get it, but we've made it much easier and we've increased the incentives for them to save on the way through so that they actually get to 65 well prepared for their retirement. That's a much better answer as well.
And I think to do that, we probably need to increase what people are contributing and incentivize that more, like you say, right? Because at the moment, I mean, you'd know more than I, but the average balance, I think last time I read, was around $30,000.
So $30,000, which is after 15 years, is still nowhere near high enough.
Oh, of course, because that's when Kiwisaver started, right? 2007, was it? 2007?
Started 2007 was when the first schemes were launched. And so it's only 15 years, but at the same time, and you do see a lot of much, much bigger balances. But I think there's still a belief. We haven't had a generation of people go through relying on their Kiwisaver yet to retire. So therefore, people haven't quite seen the benefits of contributing a lot the whole way through. And I think for massive chunks of the population, unfortunately, there is still this misguided understanding that actually NZ Super is enough and that'll just support me through, so I don't need to do anything. The truth is, for a couple, $410 a week is probably not enough for most of them to get by. I think Massey do a whole lot of research and they say the number to survive is about $800 a week. So no matter how you look at it, there's a gap, but no one really wants to open their eyes up to that.
It does seem strange every time we talk about there's an article about changing the retirement age. It's basically one of those things that politicians can't talk about because they know that they'll lose votes straight away the louder it gets, and so they've got to quickly squash it back down and be like, let's just put that one out the back and pretend that that's not something we actually have to sort out at some stage. But we're all living longer as well, so it doesn't make any sense why we're not being realistic about it.
I'll be slightly harsh here. My view is, I think extending out the retirement age is a nice white middle class thing to say, because you kind of go, there are a lot of jobs and a lot of professions where you can't really extend out your career, right? You're a construction worker. You're slogging your guts out for the last 10 years, waiting till you can retire. You work as a waitress in a cafe, any kind of labor-orientated job. Those jobs are hard. And so that's why I think we're having the wrong conversation. The conversation should not to manage costs on pensions. The conversation is not how do we stop people retiring. It's how do we make sure the right people get the right money.
Nice. So means testing, for instance.
Well, it's means testing, but it's also going, actually, again, Australia, I think, you'll hear me talk a lot about Australia. Australia's got one of the most developed superannuation systems in the world. They've got a great scheme set up that means that people have to contribute. People are but they're not angry about that because there's massive incentives to do so. We can come back to that. But then what does that mean that allows them to do for their NZ Super? That means that a lot of people don't qualify, but still, I think it's only 30% of people that get nothing in Australia out of their superannuation payments from the government. But if you really need it, you can actually get a decent number. So you can actually get kind of $1,000 a week, or I think it's $1,100 a week if you're kind of really at the lowest ends of the means testing. And then that kind of scales depending on where you are and what you have. So it's not as though it's just you get your $400 a week or you don't, because let's be honest, $400 a week doesn't cut it either.
Yeah.
It's about what have you got, how much can you contribute, and then how do we let the government top up the rest of it. So we're actually designing a system that works for everyone.
Before we look at Australia a little bit more, I just want to confirm, say I turn 65 tomorrow, can I tap like a debit card to my Kiwisaver and then basically just spend willy-nilly on that?
Pretty much. If you turned around to 65 and said, I want my 600 grand, you'd get that 600 grand.
Sweet. But I could leave it in the market too, right? Because this is kind of what I've got in my head. I think I could build this fund and then I could probably just go down to the Les Mills, get a protein shake or whatever, go see the PT, head back to the apartment for the rest of the day, and then look at the market at the end of the day and be like, shit, look at that. Compounding's helped me pay for that today.
And that's what it should be, right? So, and this is one of the things that we try and talk to our clients about, particularly the older clients. One of the things that we do is we recommend, say if you're 55 or 60, a traditional kind of product will say you've just got to go into a conservative fund, or even there's one product in the market which says you've got to go 100% cash. The truth is, though, that person is aiming to live to the age of 95. Life expectancy for our generation is expected to be in the mid-90s. And so, that's a long time that you've got to be drawing down on that Kiwisaver. And you want to make sure that Kiwisaver is still earning that kind of 5 to 10% per year return rather than the 3% return earning cash. So you're 100% right. The compounding has to keep going, and you've got to let the market keep on working for you.
Shit, I've learned something. If I'm going to live into my 90s, I need to start reconsidering the things I'm doing on the weekends.
You got your 50s and 60s for that.
Yeah, okay, nice. We'll tone it down back then. So if we look at Australia, they are way further ahead, right? They basically, their super, from what I understand, their saving for retirement's compulsory. It's a lot higher, and they've been going a lot longer. Is that right?
So their scheme got introduced in the early 80s. That's now at about $2.2 trillion Australian, or $2.5 trillion Australian, versus our $80 billion. So much, much larger. The key, though, is, and why it's larger, it's not only the time, but also the amount they contribute. So recently that was increased to a maximum of 12%. 12% I think is the minimum. And what they wanted to do was actually they tried to push through a change to make it a minimum of 14% over time. But then they couldn't make that work politically, because there's a recognition that that's actually how much people need to be saving to also get through for their retirements. What's also interesting about the Australian model versus ours, so they're doing 12%, and they know they should be doing 14%. They're not allowed to take their money out for a first home either. So for most New Zealanders, we actually start our retirement saving at the age of kind of in our early 30s, whereas in Australia, they're actually starting from the very first time they start working. And Australians are happy with this, and Australians kind of like this. And the reason they're kind of happy contributing to their super is because of the incentives and the way it works. So over there, any kind of superannuation contributions gets taxed at 17.5%, versus here, everything's taxed at your marginal tax rate. And so marginal tax rates in Australia are actually quite a lot higher than they are here as well. So the top tax bracket over there is 45%. So it's quite a big saving just by putting it into your super scheme. And then investment earnings, when they're in your super scheme, are actually tax free. And so again, they've created a set of incentives which makes it much more attractive to use that as your preferred savings vehicle, which avoids all the arguments that we have here around, well, why would I put it into Kiwisaver? Why do I do that? Or it's not worth it. And no, actually, I don't want to do it. They're giving people real incentives to save for their retirement. And none of that happens here.
Far out. We're so far behind. It's such a good idea, but then we've just got stuck at we don't want to force too many people to do it potentially.
It's a combination of, we don't want to force it. We don't want to but like a lot of things, we're not willing to think bigger picture, right? And so the obvious answer from a lot of people is they get scared because they say, but we can't afford those tax breaks. We can't afford to make that happen. But if you were to do a combination of tax breaks with kind of adjustments to the pension system and NZ Super, you end up net in a much better position. And that allows the people to kind of, it's almost kind of taking it out from here. So stopping the people that don't need to get pension, they don't get it anymore. True, they might get some pretty good tax breaks on the other side, but the tax breaks really work and fund it. And when we look at the numbers out of Australia and what their retirement system costs, it's probably similar to where ours is today in terms of as a percentage of GDP. The only difference is theirs is under control and ours is expected to balloon.
Wow. Great. The younger listeners will be stoked to hear that because as taxpayers, they'll be the ones.
We'll be the ones paying for it all.
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing, right?
Yeah. So at the moment, I think we're approaching about $100 billion of funds under management in Kiwisaver, right? And I think 2022 was a pretty bad year because it went backwards, but people they were contributing as well. So we've almost had a bit of a lost year, but that's how markets work, right? But what do you sort of see being the future of Kiwisaver? If you're putting your thinking into this, what do you predict?
Oh, look, I think, so there's a couple of things, right? Kiwisaver will keep on growing, so it's a good thing to be in, right? Markets always recover. So last year was a pretty shitty year. There's no question on it. No matter where you were as an investor, you couldn't hide from whether it was bonds that went backwards, the worst year ever on bonds. Markets went backwards. And so, but what do we know? Markets over the long run deliver kind of 7 to 10% return. We know bond markets will recover. It's just a matter of time. So expectations are for Kiwisaver to grow under the current settings to a $200 billion market by 2030. So more than doubling from where it is today. But if we can fix the contribution rates and actually turn it into kind of people's primary savings vehicle, then that can be significantly larger today than where it is today, right? And so I look at kind of, again, come back to Australia, 2.5 trillion Australian dollars. What's that? 2.7, 2.8 Kiwi. Their economy is about 6-7 times larger than New Zealand. So that actually means that we should be kind of thinking about a Kiwisaver scheme today, which could be kind of triple where it is right now, if you just put it on a thing. And think about what that does to us as a country. You go in Australia, the 10% or 8 to 10% of superannuation investments are in infrastructure. We've got a massive infrastructure bill coming in New Zealand, right? Whether it be doing climate change adaptation, whether it be actually catching up on all this investment that hasn't been done for the last 40 years. Imagine if we had Kiwisaver funds that were willing to kind of go in and help fund some of this investment.
So just that it doesn't happen at the moment?
None of it happens at the moment. There's two things. We've always struggled to find capital to do private infrastructure investments. There's been a bit of a reticence in New Zealand to fund infrastructure with private money. And also I'd argue that Kiwisaver is such a new product and has only just probably reached the scale where providers are able to look at this stuff.
Yeah.
But the flip side to that, with our 100% focus on fees at the moment, it makes it really hard, right? You as a Kiwisaver client or Kiwisaver member, you don't want me to go and do infrastructure investments because I don't know much about infrastructure. You want me to go and find the best infrastructure manager in the world to manage infrastructure investments on your behalf. And with the current focus, which is fees seems to be the only thing in the world that matters, that's really hard for me to do because I can't afford to go and pay the fees of the really good managers out there. So there's a few things that need to change.
Why can't you just go build me some toll bridges and then we'll just collect some tolls and then we'll get our return back?
Well, that sounds like the 55-year-old who kind of gets to 55 with his 300 grand in a savings account and goes, "Fuck, I'll just do a development to fund my retirement."
Okay, apologies.
Which is,
I've seen this.
You've seen that on your work. You would have seen that a lot, right?
Yeah.
And that's the problem. Like everything, right? You want experts to do it, and so that's kind of where it sits, right?
But is that kind of what it could look like? So say we know we need a new road, for instance, and we go, right, let's call on the Kiwisaver Infrastructure Fund, and it's going to be run by or managed by whoever, and then that's going to be a toll road until it's paid back or whatever. Like, is that what it could look like?
That's exactly what it looks like. So what it looks like is you've got a PPP. So you could do it as a PPP, so public-private partnership, whereby the private enterprise are the ones that kind of fund a whole lot of the upfront costs. They'll take a lot of the risk on the build, on the maintenance, And then it's eventually paid back over a 30, 35 year period. We've done it with a couple of the toll roads up north. But we can do it for anything we want. Another really attractive model, mixed ownership model, right? So we look at, energy companies are a good example of this currently here in New Zealand, where you've got the government owning 50%, private investors owning 50%. There are so many more opportunities for us to do that with critical parts of infrastructure, whether they be toll roads, toll road companies, whether that be rebuilding our Transpower, our electricity lines network, whatever we need to do. There's so many different opportunities that fundamentally either the government funds them out of general tax and puts it on the debt side, which we're all going to say no to, which means they never get done, or we figure out ways to do it privately.
Yeah. And do you think for this to happen, do we need to have a conversation about it? Do we need to change some of the rules? Or do we need to kind of like sell the idea to people? Or is just the pool of money at $90 to $100 billion just not big enough?
The pool of money is there. So I think you kind of you look at some of those larger providers, which might be managing kind of $10 to $15 billion. They've got enough to be chucking a couple of $100 million at infrastructure projects. I think there needs to be two things happen, right? At a government level, there needs to be an acceptance that this is actually a really good option and a really good way. So we need them to help create projects and be open to new projects to kind of fund in this way. And at the same time, at the Kiwisaver level, we also need to kind of allow us to have bigger, broader conversations, right? And I don't know how we do this, but fundamentally the current way of which 80% of people do Kiwisaver, which is just put it in the standard vanilla bank option, that needs to change, right? Because what we do know is the banks will never take any risk or never do anything interesting.
What do the banks do with that cash?
They'll invest it.
Yeah.
So the four banks, so if I go through three of the four, look, some of them are passive, some of them are active. As far as I'm aware, none of them do private assets. None of them really do a huge amount.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, they don't run bad schemes, but banks are not people that are ever going to go out and do things differently or try and encourage change or take risk. And that's just in their DNA, to be honest.
So then the New Zealand Super Fund, and you'd be able to explain this if I get this wrong, but that's where the government have put money aside to try and invest into the future to help reduce or subsidise the cost of superannuation, right? And they've got a big pool of coin as well.
Yeah.
Are they investing into infrastructure?
Yes, they are.
Okay.
They are. So they've got, I want to say 20% of their asset base is in private assets. And so some of that will be in infrastructure. So they, for example, they tried to go in and buy the, last year when we were talking about a couple of years ago, talking about light rail, they actually put up a proposal whereby they plus another Canadian pension fund would fund Auckland Light Rail. And they would fund it, manage it, own it, and do it on a private basis to keep it off the government balance sheet. To me, that was a pretty good idea. But they've gone and they've invested in forestry, so trees. They're big investors in all of the New Zealand companies, the New Zealand infrastructure companies as well. It's
Infratel, etc.
Infratel, all of that kind of stuff. And so, they do a lot. There's a massive opportunity there. But I think what their argument would be the level of product. And by that, what I mean is that there is not enough availability of investment opportunities for them here in New Zealand. And even something else, there's stuff around housing, public housing at the moment that's going on, right? Where you've got a whole lot of community housing providers desperately in need of cash. But again, how do we marry Kiwisaver providers up with them to allow them to provide the capital? You get really great returns on a lot of this stuff. So infrastructure typically, or in Australia, was the second highest returning asset class over the last 15 years. So you can get great returns, so it turns into a massive win for the community and also a massive win for the individual Kiwisaver members as well.
Nice. I suppose as this space grows, these things are going to happen. It's just going to take
time.
Yeah.
And look, we will get there. It's just going to take time. And I think it comes back to that contributions conversation, because as this product grows and as we encourage more people to participate, what we do is we build resilience into our communities. And so resilience comes in many different forms. So whether it be the fact that when stuff goes wrong in life, you can use Kiwisaver for your financial hardship. So over the last couple of weeks, where the forestry worker who's lost his job, he can come to us and go, cool, I'm going to take my $5,000 and out of my Kiwisaver fund to kind of help me get through today. The family that we've got that needed some money to pay for a temporary accommodation because they've kind of had their house destroyed in Hawke's Bay, Kiwisaver can help with that. All the way through to people are confident and comfortable in retirement because they've saved enough. And I think that's why I go, Kiwisaver is such a great tool that we can use to build that resilience, whether it be infrastructure, hardship, retirement. It does so many different things for so many different people, but we have to start kind of treating it with the respect that it deserves.
Here's a tough one for you. Do you think the platforms, and I won't name them, that have made it easier to now invest have made it better or worse for Kiwisaver?
Oh, look, I think the current platforms in the market, I think that's great. They've turned people into a world of investors. Realistically, what we need to think about and look at is in 2 years' time, who is still there and how many people are still investing. And this will come back to a combination of what we've seen over the last kind of couple of months, as we've seen fees have grown significantly. We've seen the job cuts. We've seen kind of these platforms already pulling back. And what I hope is that these things can become permanent parts of the New Zealand infrastructure and the New Zealand financial infrastructure rather than just simply bull market fads. The stat that I like to kind of talk about, 1999, 2000, there were about 4 or 5 online brokers in New Zealand. By 2002, there was one.
Wow, really?
And was 2021, 2022 the same thing? I don't think so, because I do think a lot of these entities have done amazing jobs around education and around helping their investors on the way through. But often as a financial service provider, it's during these times when the markets are pretty shitty and choppy that we've got to do a much better job around educating and helping our clients. Yet at the same time, that's when all the money dries up. So it makes it harder to do.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Because I wondered if people are looking at Kiwisaver and going, well, I can invest on an online platform and it's really easy now. Why would I even have Kiwisaver when I can just do it for myself?
Yeah. Plus, you also look at the online platforms and you go, I can take control. And I think that's something that's still missing in the New Zealand market. The Kiwisaver platforms haven't really, no one's built a full self-select. I think we've done probably one of the better jobs with the ability to kind of pick and choose around 9 different funds and a whole lot of themes and stuff like that. But we still don't have a market where it's like the Australian, the self-managed super in the UK, where I have my self-managed pension, where people can pick and choose and really do what they want. I think what we've seen over the last 2 years is that's a product that people really want. That's a product that people want to get to with the launch of the Sharesies and Hatch platforms, but we haven't seen that yet in Kiwisaver. And I do think if we could build that, that's actually something that massively increases engagement, and that's something that massively increases people's desire to invest in that product as well. Personally, I thought it was really sad that Sharesies weren't able to do the full self-select product. I mean, the Kiwisaver scheme that they're about to launch looks pretty vanilla, which I think is really sad. And I'm not sure whether that's a regulatory issue or what's driven that. But I was hoping that they'd kind of come in with something that would completely transform how people think about Kiwisaver in New Zealand.
From what I understand, it's just other providers.
They've got
funds. 4
different providers, I think, which basically allows you to choose a growth balance or conservative fund. So,
what's the advantage of using their whatever it is that they're promoting? I haven't really looked into it.
I have no idea.
Yeah, okay.
I think I don't know. Potentially, so you can manage everything from a single spot. But
so you can probably log in, because people like to be able to log in and see. My mum was a classic, for instance. She would use ANZ for Kiwisaver because she could see it when she went into internet banking. And that was the main thing that was important for her. So I wonder if Sharesies are kind of going to play the same thing.
I think so. Big difference you got to remember, though. The banks have this ability to, whenever you walk into a branch or whenever they have a conversation with you on the product, and it happens so often, and every time in a branch I seem to hear it because I'm listening out for it, of course, but hey, I see you don't have your Kiwisaver with us. Would you like me to should we have a look at that? Is there a reason why?
Yeah.
And it's that ability to kind of get to the customers that have never thought about it that's so powerful for them.
Yeah. Yeah. Or Let's talk about your insurance.
Yeah. And that's it, right?
They've got every product, right?
They do. And so I think that's one of the other things that we would love to see with Kiwisaver, and this is going to require product innovation to get there. But how do we kind of reduce the dominance of the banks, right? The banks plus AMP, who's basically a bank, they control about 75% of the Kiwisaver market at the moment. If we want innovation, we want things to happen, and we want things to be done differently, I think it's going to need to be done by other smaller providers in the market. But the banks are really hard to compete against.
Wow, yeah, I read that 75% of people in Kiwisaver haven't sought financial advice, but then of the 25% of people who have, 50% of it have got it from the banks. Does that sound loosely accurate?
Yeah. The question is, what's the definition of financial advice? Is it kind of, and I think that's the big question. What is the
it's
definition?
probably just, which fund should I be in? Oh, you're this age, go into aggressive.
Exactly.
Forgot to ask, what are your goals?
Yeah.
What are you trying to achieve?
I mean, to give the banks credit, one thing we do see is when people try and leave. We've got this one bank in particular, what they'll often do is ring up and say, we see that you're leaving. Would you like to come and sit down with our Kiwisaver specialist and get some advice now?
Oh, yeah.
Which frustrates us as a competitor.
Yeah.
And probably frustrates the customers even more, sitting there going, I've been with you for 15 years and the only time you're willing to have that conversation with me is when I offer to leave.
We're about to break up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that promise of change at the last minute never quite works.
No.
Never saves the relationship.
No. We actually, in my accounting practice, we talk about that. If a client wants to go, we have a bit of a rule of basically like let them go and help them move on as fast as they can. Because often that you get taught, try and solve it and figure it out. But often, they've made the decision and it's past that point. So
I think that's really smart because A, you're going to spend a lot of time and effort trying to save that client. And B, the grass is always greener on the other side, right? And so you almost need to let them, if you're comfortable that you've done the right job and the good job on the way through, you almost need to let them go and figure out, actually, things aren't a million times better somewhere else.
Yeah, actually, I saw something on that where it's really good when you do lose a customer to get back in touch with them in like 3 to 6 months and basically say, hey, just want to check in, make sure everything's okay, and let you know that would happily have you back. Because often people will get buyer's remorse, I think they'll call it, but they're too embarrassed to go back to where they've left. So
it's an interesting strategy. That's a great. I haven't thought about that, but that's a great strategy.
Yeah. So set up some sort of automation, or even just like reach out if you guys lose any.
Yeah, exactly. That's we don't lose very many customers, but that's actually quite an interesting way of doing it.
Yeah. There we go. Anyway, back to self-select. So is there a risk with the self-select product, so that where it's dangerous, where you get that, or maybe it's that small percentage of people that want to day trade it, or they'll be wanting to buy and sell or use their Kiwisaver every month where they're picking and choosing what they're doing?
Yeah, but I think it's all about risk parameters. We can help clients manage their risk, right? And there's two things that go through my mind. One is, as a finance industry, we're extremely good at telling people, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this. And by the way, you're not smart enough to do it in a different way, right? We're very good at telling people how complicated and how hard our world is. And that's why they just need to leave it to a professional manager. So my view is we should actually give people due respect and we should kind of treat them like adults. We should let them make their own decisions. But we kind of put some parameters around how they do it, right? So self-select might mean that they're not allowed to go and invest in everything. Should a Kiwisaver member be investing in South? Who knows? If they are, though, but we kind of say, look, maybe an asset like that, we're going to cap it and say it's only 1 to 2%. So there's fundamentally, investing is as much about managing risk as it is about picking the right winners and losers. And it's really easy to manage risk and really easy to find some set parameters around that. And so that's kind of my view. If you are going to go self-select, you do the risk management side of it for the clients. So you making sure you are managing their risk appropriately, but at the same time, you're letting them kind of take control and try and pick the winners and try and do what they want.
See, I use a self-select, but I know that there are limitations with it. And one of those was I tried to put part of my Kiwisaver into A2 Milk.
Oh, yeah.
before the bull run, and I never got to milk the cow because I wasn't allowed to.
Oh, no.
So they said
then
no.
Then you were even angrier.
Big time. Yeah, I think it was about $250,000 I missed out on if I had have like sold at the top, which I wouldn't have because I'm an idiot. So I probably
You would have held back to $5 as well.
yeah, 100%. Or I would have sold, a third of the way up and been like, I've clocked this. I am Kiwisaver. But I've tried to buy another couple of shares as well, and they've basically said no. Like you can't. That's not on our safe list or something. I'm like, hang on, who's making the safe list? But now, obviously, A2 Milk is. But everyone wrote it on the way down as well, I'd imagine.
Yeah, that stuff's really hard, right?
Yeah.
I'd say you should have been allowed to, but you should have only been allowed to put X percent in.
Yeah, it was pretty early days, like it was pretty risque. Yeah, but anyway, I got one right. What else can you foresee happening in the Kiwisaver space?
Oh, look, I think so. Hopefully we get contribution changes. Hopefully, and then hopefully we just get more innovation and diversification in terms of product. I think New Zealand, we're a leader in terms of the ESG, so environmental, social governance, first and best in the world, I think, at what we've done in that space. Now I think it'd be great to see the next layer around financial advice. I mean, a rule that we'd kind of love to see is that every single provider has to force every single client to a digital advice tool before they're allowed to sign up, because that means that gets around this whole problem of people not being there and not being in the right fund and in the right place. But I think we're a long way away from that. I think fundamentally the next pieces of innovation are going to be around product, and that means how do we bring infrastructure into play, how do we bring more private assets into play, and how do we allow people to make some of their own decisions, because we know that's what people want to do. And that's what happens everywhere else in the world. We're the only country in the world that doesn't allow this. And that's primarily, I think, because it is a new product, but also because we're probably further along the spectrum of wanting to protect investors rather than treating them like adults.
When I think about Kiwisaver, like someone actually asked me last week would I go back and would I do uni again? And I say no, but I mean, admittedly, like it has helped me and whatnot, but it's just unlocked doors. But I say if I were to start again, I reckon I'd probably work in the Kiwisaver space, because I just think it's the industry that over the next 40 or 50 years, if you commit a career of that long, and I think a lot differently to what I probably would have in my 20s, I'd sort of look at, a couple of years and think that was a long time. But now if I was to pick an industry, I think it's probably one of the most exciting ones that we have to be involved in, because as the pool gets bigger, you just know that way more cool shit's going to happen.
Well, that's why I'm here.
Yeah.
I think you're 100% right. It's an industry.
But it happens so slowly, right, compared to mortgage lending.
But that'll change.
Yeah.
And that's about, to be blunt, that's about the big balances moving away from the banks.
Yeah.
Once you start getting a whole lot of those second-tier providers with good scale, that's where you're going to start to see it all right. So you have seen over the last probably 3 years, 4 years, you have seen Kiwisaver's funds go, a few of them have started going to venture capital. You have started to see some of the moves into private equity and private assets. So it is starting to get there. It's just got a lot further to go. One of the hard things we have in New Zealand is we're a long way away from the rest of the world, and it is a small economy and a small market.
Yeah.
And we still haven't figured out how to kind of balance those two things. But we still have an economy that's crying out for capital, and we have NZTE spending tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars every year racing offshore looking for capital. So my thinking is that is here, that will be put to use. It's just a matter of time before we figure out how to do it.
I like it, yeah. I think if we've only got 1.3-ish million people contributing to Kiwisaver actively, like how many people would take a Air New Zealand flight each year? Probably more than that, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah. So people are willing to spend on a flight. More people will interact and transact with Air New Zealand each year, probably, than what they will to save for their retirement.
But a lot of that comes back down to incentives, right? That people don't.
The lollies at the end of the trip.
Exactly. There's a lolly at the end of the trip, which I'm going to get after my hour and a half.
Yeah.
Waiting 35 years till you're 65, that's a lot harder.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think, well, it's clearly why you do what you do and why you do this amazing job on podcast, that you're looking at your client base, right? There'd be very few of your clients that would contribute to Kiwisaver because most of them go, why bother? And that's why we need to do, in my view, we need to do a better job at incentivizing, encouraging people to save versus, and I'll come back to your job, your kind of your accounting practice. How many of your clients, particularly the ones that are approaching retirement age, businesses don't start to go a little bit sideways, not going so well? Imagine if they had a nice Kiwisaver account that was sitting there as a foil, what that would do to their stress levels and how they'd kind of change some of their decision making, because they didn't have everything tied up in that single business as well. No one can think like that. No one thinks that far in advance because no one ever thinks they're going to be that person. So we're going to have to do other things, which is basically incentivization, to make it more important for people.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I think as well, a lot of self-employed people won't contribute because they're not taking a PAYE salary.
Exactly.
Often they might be taking drawings. They want to hold the money back in their business to, might just not even be there. So then they're not contributing to Kiwisaver at all. But sometimes clients will ask me, do you think I should be voluntarily contributing? And, I'm not supposed to be giving financial advice, right? So I have to be careful what I say exactly. But I'm basically like, of course, like if you want to be saving for your retirement, you need to be doing something. And if it's going to be doing something rather than doing nothing, then of course you need to set up an automatic payment and start making it happen.
Yeah, and it comes back to the diversification argument as well, right? Far too many small business owners have all of their wealth tied up in their house and their business.
Yeah.
And 1 in 10 businesses go bust in New Zealand every year. You never want to think that it's going to be you, but unfortunately it does. I was speaking to a really sad story from a client last year. She had a hostel. 2020, I think I spoke to her in 2021. We should finally manage to get her life back together after losing everything. But kind of only just starting on the Kiwisaver journey in their mid-50s at that point, because she had always thought the business was what was going to solve all the problems on the way through.
No. Yeah.
And the more I've know lots of those stories, and that's where I kind of go, that's why this is so important. On one hand, everyone talks about the fact that you can't access Kiwisaver until you're 65 as being the biggest downfall. I think that's potentially one of its biggest advantages.
Yeah, save you from yourself.
Exactly.
I look at it in two ways. So one, with debt, I wish I try and encourage people to think about, because I didn't do this, I was stupid with debt, but ask, if you're about to use buy now, pay later, or a credit card or whatever, ask your future self, would they be happy to pay this back for you?
Yep.
And then the same thing, when I contribute extra to my Kiwisaver, one of the main reasons I did it is because I know my future self will thank my current self for doing it.
Yeah.
Because my future self will be able to see all of the things that will happen in that time period, to the point where I go like, shit, I'm glad I did that. But my current self can't see what those things are.
No, exactly. Delayed gratification. As human beings, we are not very good. Your mind is wired in a very different way to most people.
Weird, yeah.
Well, it's good.
Yeah.
But it's the way. That's the way we all should be thinking, right?
Takes practice for sure.
Yeah, but also the other honest truth, and this is what I say to people: it doesn't need to be much. And for the sake of an extra $30 a week, $40 a week, a couple of lunches or something small, you can make a massive difference. And I think that's what people don't understand, is that actually putting aside $50 a week or $30 a week into your Kiwisaver, that actually is a number that turns into 600 grand if you do it for long enough.
Yeah. And I don't think there'd be many Kiwis in New Zealand that can actually pull out a bank statement and say, I've been able to save 600 grand.
Exactly.
So I think it is a great mechanism to have a crack at it. Well, thanks, mate, for joining me. Again, that's been really, really interesting. And I think the future of Kiwisaver is just going to continue to evolve as this number keeps getting bigger. And you're obviously doing some great work in this space as well. So if people want to check you guys out, where should they head to?
So we're Koura Wealth, www.kourawealth.co.nz. Go look on the website. Otherwise, try and find us on Facebook, Instagram, or anywhere else where you look. Hopefully, we're here.
You on TikTok yet?
We tried TikTok.
Yeah.
Couldn't make it work.
Okay.
I think, I'll be honest, we haven't quite figured out how to set the right tone to make it appeal. We're still we like to think that we are a disruptor and not traditional, but we're still way too fucking traditional for TikTok.
Oh, there you go. Maybe you've just found your tone. Well, if you need some help in that space, I think the people at the Attention Seeker are pretty good at that. Shout out to them for having us in their studio again. But thanks for joining me, mate, and we'll have to do this again in the future.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you for having me.